The rain hammered against the windows of Sweet Dreams Bakery like angry fists. Inside, Helen wiped her hands on her flour-covered apron and stared at the stack of bills on the counter. Each envelope felt heavier than the last. Electric bill, rent notice, supplier invoices. The numbers swam together in a blur that made her stomach twist. 6 months ago, her world had been different. David would have been here beside her, his deep laugh filling the kitchen as he kneaded tomorrow's bread. His strong hands would have already solved half these problems before breakfast. But cancer doesn't care about dreams or small businesses or the woman left behind to pick up the pieces. Helen pressed her palms against the cool marble counter and took a shaky breath. The bakery felt too big and too empty without him. Every corner held memories of their shared plans. They were going to expand. Maybe add a small cafe section where people could sit and enjoy fresh pastries with their morning coffee. Those dreams felt like someone else's life now. The morning rush had been slower than usual. Only 12 customers before noon, and most of them just grabbed a single muffin or cookie. Mrs. Patterson from down the street had bought her usual apple turnover but mentioned she might have to cut back on treats now that her husband's hours got reduced at the factory. Everyone in town was feeling the pinch. Helen walked to the front window and looked out at Main Street. Half the storefronts had for lease signs taped to their windows. The hardware store that had been there for 40 years closed last month. Even the old diner was struggling to stay open past dinner time. Small towns were dying all over the country, and Millbrook seemed determined to join them. She pulled out a piece of cardboard from behind the register and found a black marker. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote, "Help Wanted," in large letters. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could barely afford to pay herself, let alone hire someone else. But she couldn't keep working 16-hour days. The bakery opened at 6 in the morning, and she was often still cleaning up at 9 at night. Maybe a high school student would work for minimum wage. Someone who just needed gas money or spending cash for the weekend. It wasn't much, but it might help both of them. Helen taped the sign to the inside of the front window, right where people walking by couldn't miss it. The afternoon dragged on with only a handful of customers. She spent the time cleaning ovens that were already spotless and reorganizing supplies that didn't need reorganizing. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from wandering to the growing pile of unpaid bills. Around 4 o'clock, the sky grew darker and the rain picked up. Helen was mixing dough for tomorrow's cinnamon rolls when she heard a soft knock at the front door. Strange timing for customers. But maybe someone needed a last-minute cake for a birthday or anniversary. She wiped her hands and walked to the front, expecting to see a familiar face from town. Instead, 2 girls stood outside in the downpour. They looked exactly alike, from their dark hair plastered against their heads to their thin jackets that offered no protection from the storm. They couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 years old. Helen unlocked the door and opened it quickly. Come in, you're soaked to the bone." The girls stepped inside, leaving small puddles on the tile floor. They carried identical backpacks that looked like they'd seen better days, and their clothes hung loose like they'd lost weight recently. But what struck Helen most were their eyes. They had the careful, watchful look of kids who'd learned not to trust too easily. "We saw your sign," one of the girls said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "We were told you needed help." "We'll work." "For nothing," the other girl added quickly. "Forever, if you want. Just please keep us." Helen's heart clenched. Something in their tone made her think of stray cats who'd been kicked too many times. They stood close together, shoulders touching, like they drew strength from each other. "Who told you I needed help?" Helen asked gently. She grabbed 2 clean towels from behind the counter and handed them over. The girls exchanged a quick glance. Before the first one answered, "The lady at the grocery store. She was talking to someone about how your bakery was having trouble since your husband passed. We're really sorry about that." Helen nodded, recognizing Mrs. Rodriguez's tendency to share neighborhood news with anyone who'd listen. "What are your names?" "I'm Lucy," said the girl on the left. "This is my sister Lily. Where are your parents? Do they know you're here?" Another glance passed between them. Lily twisted the towel in her hands. "We don't really have parents right now. We've been staying in different places, foster homes, and stuff, but we're good workers, honest. We know how to clean and we learn fast. Foster homes? That explained the wariness in their eyes and the way they kept checking the door like they might need to run. Helen had volunteered at the children's shelter years ago, before the bakery took over her life. She recognized the signs of kids who'd been shuffled around too much. "How did you get here?" Helen asked. "Millbrook isn't exactly on the main bus route." "We walked," Lucy said simply. "It took us 2 days, but we didn't mind. We heard this was a good town. Quiet, safe." 2 days in this weather, Helen's protective instincts kicked in. These girls needed more than just jobs. They needed someone to care whether they lived or died. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Both girls nodded eagerly, and Helen saw them try to hide their relief. She led them to the small table in the corner where she usually did paperwork and brought over day-old pastries and hot chocolate. The girls ate like they hadn't seen food in days, which might have been true. While they ate, Helen studied them more carefully. Despite their rough appearance, they had good manners. They said please and thank you, cleaned up after themselves, and didn't grab for seconds until offered. Someone had raised them right, even if that someone wasn't around anymore. "You said you'd work for nothing," Helen said finally. "Why would you do that?" Lily looked up from her hot chocolate. "Because we need somewhere to belong. We're tired of being moved around like packages nobody wants to keep. If we work hard enough, maybe you won't want to get rid of us either." The honesty in her voice hit Helen like a physical blow. These girls weren't just looking for jobs. They were looking for home. Helen glanced at the stack of bills on the counter, then back at the twins. She couldn't afford to hire anyone. She could barely afford to keep the lights on. But looking at these two girls, she realized something important. Sometimes the right choice and the smart choice weren't the same thing. "I can't pay much," she said slowly, "and I'd need to figure out where you'd stay." "There's an apartment upstairs," Lucy said quickly. "We saw the stairs when we came in. We could fix it up ourselves if it needs work. We're handy that way." Helen had forgotten about the tiny apartment above the bakery. David had used it for storage, but it had a bathroom and a small kitchenette. With some cleaning and basic furniture, it could work. "Let me think about this overnight," Helen said. "Can you stay somewhere safe tonight?" The girls nodded, though. Their eyes showed disappointment. "We'll be okay. We found a place." Helen doubted that, but she didn't push. She'd learned that rushing scared kids only made them run faster. As the twins prepared to leave, Helen made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Helen barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those two girls walking away in the rain, their thin jackets no match for the storm. She kept imagining them huddled somewhere cold and wet, waiting for morning. By 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and headed downstairs to start the ovens. The bakery felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Usually, the familiar routine of mixing and kneading brought her comfort. Today, her hands moved automatically while her mind raced with questions. What did she really know about Lucy and Lily? They could be running from anything. Bad foster homes, sure, but what if it was something worse? What if taking them and put everyone in danger? But then she remembered the way they'd eaten those pastries. The careful politeness that spoke of good upbringing despite their circumstances. The way they'd looked at each other for strength and support. Those weren't the behaviors of dangerous kids. Those were the actions of children who'd been let down by too many adults. At exactly 7 o'clock, someone knocked on the front door. Helen looked up from the cash register to see both girls standing outside. They looked cleaner than yesterday, their hair combed and their clothes straightened as much as possible. They must have found somewhere to wash up. "We came back," Lucy said when Helen opened the door, "to see if you decided." Helen studied their faces. In the morning light, she could see they were probably closer to 15 than 17. "Just babies." "Really, come sit down, we need to talk." The girls perched on the edge of chairs like birds ready to fly away at the first sign of rejection. Helen poured them coffee and brought over fresh blueberry muffins, still warm from the oven. "Before I decide anything, I need to know the truth." Helen said gently. All of it. Where did you really come from? Lily picked at her muffin. We've been in foster care since we were 8. Our mom died in a car accident and we never knew. Our dad? The first few homes were okay, Lucy continued. But then they split us up. Said it was easier to place one kid than 2. We kept running away to find each other. So they put us back together, but with this family called the Millers. Lily's voice got quieter. They took in 6 foster kids at once. Said they loved helping children, but really they just wanted the monthly checks. Helen set down her coffee cup. What do you mean? We did all the housework. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, yard work, everything. From the time we got home from school until bedtime. If we complained or didn't work fast enough, no dinner. If we talked back, no dinner for 2 days, Lucy nodded. The Millers went on vacation to Hawaii last month. With money they should have spent on us. While they were gone, we had to take care of the younger kids with no food in the house. That's when we knew we had to leave. We walked to town and heard Mrs. Rodriguez talking to her friend at the grocery store, Lily added. She said you were struggling since your husband died and might need help. It seemed like maybe we could help each other. Helen felt anger rising in her chest. Not at the girls, but at the system that had failed them so completely. Did you report the Millers to your social worker? Both girls laughed bitterly. Miss Johnson visits once every 3 months for 30 minutes, Lucy said. The Millers put on a good show. Fresh flowers, homemade cookies, clean clothes for everyone. She never saw what really happened. Besides, Lily added, we tried reporting problems before at other places. They just moved us somewhere else, usually worse. At least at the Millers we were together. Helen was quiet for a long moment, processing what she'd heard. These girls hadn't just run away on a whim. They'd made a calculated decision to save themselves and each other. You walked for 2 days to get here, she said finally. That's almost 40 miles. 43, Lucy corrected. We know because we looked it up at the library before we left. We brought water bottles and granola bars we'd saved from school lunches. The planning involved in their escape impressed Helen. These weren't impulsive teenagers. They were survivors who'd learned to think ahead. What happens if you're social? Worker tracks you down here? Helen asked. The girls exchanged one of their silent looks. She probably won't look very hard, Lily said. The Millers will tell her we're just problem kids who run away a lot. She file a report and move on. There are too many kids in the system to spend much time chasing the ones who leave. But if she does find us, Lucy said quietly, we'll just disappear again. We're good at being invisible when we need to be. Helen's heart broke a little more. No child should have to be good at being invisible. Show me your hands, she said suddenly. Both girls held out their palms without question. Helen saw exactly what she'd expected. Calluses and small scars from hard work. These weren't the soft hands of teenagers who spent their time texting and watching videos. These were working hands that had scrubbed floors and washed dishes and carried heavy loads. You really know how to work, Helen said. We're fast learners too, Lily said eagerly. We can do whatever you need. Baking, cleaning, customer service. We've watched cooking shows and read library books about running restaurants. Lucy pulled a small notebook from her backpack. We wrote down ideas for the bakery. Ways to bring in more customers without spending much money. Helen flipped through the pages, amazed. The girls had sketched out plans for rearranging the display case, ideas for daily specials, and suggestions for partnering with the high school for special events. Their handwriting was neat and their ideas were surprisingly sophisticated. You did all this research before you came here. We wanted to be useful, Lucy said. We figured if we could prove we'd help the business, you might let us stay. Helen closed the notebook and looked at both girls. They sat perfectly still, barely breathing, waiting for her decision. She thought about the bills on her counter, the empty apartment upstairs, the loneliness that had been eating at her since David died. I can't pay you much to start, she said finally. Maybe $50 a week each, plus room and board? The apartment upstairs needs work, but it's livable. The transformation in their faces was immediate. Hope replaced fear, and for the first time since they'd arrived, they looked like normal teenagers instead of tiny adults carrying the weight of the world. "You mean it?" Lily whispered. "Really? Really. But we're going to do this right. No hiding, no running away if problems come up. We'll figure out the legal stuff together. And you're going to school. That's non-negotiable." Lucy started crying, which made Lily cry, which made Helen's eyes water too. They all sat there sniffling and smiling at the same time. "Thank you," Lucy managed between tears. "You won't regret this. We'll work so hard." "I know you will," Helen said. "But first, let's get you settled upstairs. Then I'll teach you how to make my grandmother's cinnamon rolls. If you're going to work in a bakery, you might as well learn from the best recipes." As the three of them climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment, Helen felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe saving these girls would save her too. The apartment above the bakery looked like a tornado had hit it. Boxes of old receipts covered every surface, and dust particles danced in the morning sunlight streaming through dirty windows. Helen stood in the doorway with Lucy and Lily, suddenly embarrassed by the mess. "I know it doesn't look like much," she said, moving a stack of Christmas decorations from the couch. "David used this as storage for years." "It's perfect," Lily said, and she meant it. She walked to the window and looked down at Main Street. "We've never lived anywhere with our own window before." Lucy was already examining the small kitchenette. "The stove works, right? And the refrigerator?" When Helen nodded, she smiled. "Then it's a castle." Over the next 3 days, the apartment transformed. The girls worked with an energy that amazed Helen. They sorted through boxes, cleaned surfaces she'd forgotten existed, and organized everything with military precision. Helen contributed some basic furniture from her own house, a small table, 2 twin beds, and an old dresser that had belonged to her mother. "You don't have to give us your things," Lucy protested when Helen arrived with armloads of bedding and towels. "They're just sitting in my closets gathering dust," Helen replied. "Besides, David always said things should be used, not stored." The girls had never owned much, so they treated every donated item like treasure. They made the beds with hospital corners and folded the towels in perfect stacks. When Helen brought up a small television from the bakery's break room, they acted like she'd given them gold. Downstairs in the bakery, the real learning began. Helen had expected to teach them basic tasks like sweeping and washing dishes. She hadn't expected them to absorb everything like sponges soaking up water. "The secret to good bread," Helen explained on their second morning, "is patience. You can't rush the rising process." Lily watched intently as Helen kneaded dough. "How do you know when it's ready?" "Feel." Helen guided Lily's hands to the dough. "It should be smooth and elastic. Like this, now you try." Lily's first attempt was clumsy, but she had good instincts. Lucy preferred the decorating side of things. Her steady hands proved perfect for piping frosting roses and writing messages on birthday cakes. "You're naturals at this," Helen told them after they'd successfully baked their first batch of dinner rolls without help. "We had to cook for the other foster kids," Lucy explained. "Basic stuff, but we learned to follow recipes and time things right." The girls insisted on earning their keep. They arrived downstairs every morning at 5:30, ready to work. They swept floors, cleaned display cases, and restocked supplies without being asked. But more than that, they brought something the bakery had been missing since. David died. Laughter. Helen found herself smiling again as she listened to them debate whether chocolate chip cookies should have pecans or just chips. They had opinions about everything and weren't shy about sharing them. "The cinnamon rolls would sell better if we put them by the register," Lily suggested one afternoon. "People see them while they're paying and decide they want one." She was right. Helen moved the display, and cinnamon roll sales increased by 30%. "How did you know that would work?" Helen asked. "We watched customers," Lucy said. "Most people come in knowing what they want, but they always look around while you ring them up. If you put the good stuff where they're looking, they buy more." Helen finished. "You two are going to make excellent business owners someday." The compliment made both girls glow with pride, but integrating them into the community proved trickier than Helen had expected. When she took them to register for school, the secretary asked pointed questions about guardianship and documentation. Helen explained they were staying with her temporarily while family issues got sorted out. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. We'll need their previous school records, the secretary said, and immunization papers, plus a guardian's signature on all the forms. Helen's stomach nodded. She hadn't thought about the bureaucratic obstacles. What if the records are delayed? Can they start classes while we wait? I suppose, for a few days, but we'll need proper documentation soon. That night, Helen sat the girls down for a serious conversation. We need to talk about making this official. I can't keep telling people you're just visiting. Both girls went very still. Official how? Lucy asked carefully. I could look into becoming your legal guardian. It would mean you could stay permanently, go to school without questions, see doctors when you need to. But it would also mean the system would know where we are, Lily said quietly. Social services would get involved again. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. If we do it right with a lawyer helping us, we could make sure you don't get sent back to places like the Millers. The girls exchanged one of their silent conversations. Helen had learned to recognize these moments when they communicated without words. What if they say no? Lucy asked. What if they decide you're not fit to take care of us and put us somewhere worse? Helen's heart ached at the fear in their voices. Then we'll figure something else out. But hiding forever isn't really living. You deserve better than that. We deserve this, Lily said, gesturing around the warm kitchen. We deserve you. But what if trying to make it legal ruins everything? It was a valid concern. Helen had heard horror stories about well-meaning adults who tried to help foster kids, only to have the system snatch them away. But she'd also seen what happened to kids who stayed off the radar. They aged out with no real support, no safety net, no future. Let me make some calls, she said finally, quietly. See what our options are. We don't have to decide anything right now. The next morning brought their first real test. Mrs. Patterson came in for her usual apple turnover and chatted with Lily at the register. Everything went smoothly until Mrs. Patterson asked where the girls were from. We're from up north, Lily said smoothly. Our Aunt Helen is letting us stay while our parents sort some things out. Helen nearly choked on her coffee. Aunt Helen? How wonderful that family helps family, Mrs. Patterson said. You girls are lucky to have someone who cares. Yes, ma'am, Lucy chimed in from behind the counter. We know how lucky we are. After Mrs. Patterson left, Helen looked at the twins. Aunt Helen? It just came out, Lily said, blushing, but it felt right. You feel more like family than anyone we've ever lived with. Besides, Lucy added, people expect family to look after each other. It explains why we're here without making anyone suspicious. Helen was impressed by their quick thinking, but also worried about the web of small lies they were building. Eventually, someone would ask questions they couldn't answer smoothly. That afternoon, while the girls worked on homework at the corner table, Helen made a decision. She picked up the phone and called information, asking for the number of family law attorneys in the county seat. It was time to stop hiding and start fighting for what they all wanted, a real family, legal and permanent. The girls deserved advocates who understood the system. They deserved protection that went beyond Helen's good intentions. As she dialed the first number, Helen watched Lucy help Lily with algebra problems. They'd created something beautiful here in just 1 week. Now she had to find a way to protect it. Word spread through Millbrook the way it always did in small towns. Quietly at first. Then, like wildfire, Mrs. Rodriguez noticed the 2 girls working at the bakery and mentioned it to her neighbor. The neighbor told her sister, who told her book club, who told their husbands at the diner. Within 2 weeks, everyone in town knew about Helen's new helpers. Most people were curious but kind. They'd order an extra donut just to chat with Lucy and Lily, asking gentle questions about where they came from and how long they'd be staying. The girls had gotten good at giving vague but friendly answers that satisfied most folks without revealing Too much. They're such sweet girls, old Mr. Chun told Helen one morning while picking up bread for his wife. Polite as can be, you can tell they were raised right. Helen's doing a good thing, taking them in, added Mrs. Foster, who ran the flower shop next door. Those girls have put some life back in this place. It was true. The bakery felt different now, warmer somehow. Customers lingered longer, drawn in by the girls' enthusiasm and Helen's renewed energy. Lucy had suggested playing soft music in the background, and Lily had convinced Helen to put up a small chalkboard with daily specials. Written in colorful chalk dot sales were improving too. Not dramatically, but enough that Helen could sleep a little better at night. The girls' instincts about customer service proved right again and again. They remembered people's names, asked about their families, and somehow knew exactly when to offer a free cookie to brighten someone's day. You two are natural salespeople, Helen told them one busy Saturday morning. You make everyone feel special. Because they are special, Lily said simply. Mrs. Jenkins comes in every Tuesday for blueberry muffins because they remind her of the ones her grandmother made. Mr. Williams only buys oatmeal cookies because his doctor said they're healthier, but he really wants chocolate chip. Everyone has a story. How do you know all that? Helen asked, amazed. We listen, Lucy explained. People tell you things if you pay attention. The attention wasn't all positive, though. Some folks had questions that made Helen nervous. The bank manager asked pointed questions about the girl's legal status when Helen applied for a small business loan. The school nurse wanted emergency contact information beyond Helen's number. And then there was Carol Brennan. Carol had lived in Millbrook her whole life and appointed herself the town's unofficial watchdog. She had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. She cornered Helen at the post office on a Tuesday afternoon. Those girls you've taken in, Carol said without preamble. Are they legal? Helen's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. What do you mean? I mean, did you go through proper channels? Background checks? Home studies? All that? You can't just take in random children these days. There are procedures. They're family, Helen said, using the girl's cover story. Their situation is temporary while their parents sort some things out. Carol's eyes narrowed. Funny thing about that, I called my cousin who works for social services up in the county seat, asked her to check on any recent family placements. She couldn't find any record of twins being placed with relatives in Millbrook. Helen's blood turned cold, but she forced herself to shrug. Paperwork moved slowly. You know how government offices are. Maybe, Carol said. But if something fishy is going on, I'll find out. Children's safety is nothing to mess around with. That evening, Helen sat the girls down and told them about the conversation. Their faces went pale. She's going to keep digging, Lucy said quietly. People like her always do. What if she calls the Millers? Lily asked, panic creeping into her voice. What if they're looking for us? Helen had been wondering the same thing. She'd contacted 3 lawyers over the past week, but none of them had called back yet. The legal system moved too slowly for their situation. Let's not panic, she said, though her own heart was racing. Maybe Carol will lose interest. She's got plenty of other things to worry about, but Carol didn't lose interest. Over the next few days, she made a point of stopping by the bakery. During busy periods, asking the girls questions about their family, their previous schools, their parents' jobs. Lucy and Lily handled it well, sticking to their story. But Helen could see the stress wearing on them. The worst part was how it affected their relationship with other customers. Word got around that Carol was asking questions, and suddenly people were more careful around the girls. Some folks still came in regularly, but others seemed to avoid eye contact or cut their visits short. People are starting to look at us differently, Lily observed one quiet Thursday afternoon. Like we might be dangerous or something. We're not dangerous, Lucy said fiercely. We're just kids trying to survive. Helen's heart broke for them. They'd finally found a place where they felt safe and valued, and now that security was being threatened by one woman's suspicions, the situation came to a head on a Friday morning in late October. Helen was teaching the girls how to make pumpkin bread, when Carol walked in with a stranger, a woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. Helen Thompson? The stranger asked. I'm Janet Morrison from County Social Services. I need to speak with you about the minors in your care. Helen's legs went weak. Behind her, she heard Lily make a small, scared sound. I don't know what you mean, Helen said, but her voice came out shaky. These are Lucy and Lily Chun, Ms. Morrison continued, reading from a file. Age 15, missing from their authorized placement for 6 weeks. Their foster family is quite worried about them. Worried. About losing their monthly checks, maybe, Lucy said under her breath. Miss Morrison heard her. Young lady, the Millers are good people who provide homes for children in need. You had no right to run away and worry them like this. Good people don't make kids work 16 hours a day without food, Lily said, finding her voice. That's a serious accusation, Miss Morrison replied. But regardless of your complaints, you're minors in the custody of the state. You belong with your assigned family, Helen stepped forward. They're happy here. They're going to school. They're healthy. They're contributing to the community. Isn't that what matters? What matters is following proper procedures, Miss Morrison said firmly. Miss Thompson, you're harboring runaway minors without authorization. That's a crime. These girls need to come with me now. No! Lucy grabbed Lily's hand. We won't go back there. You can't make us. Actually, I can, Ms. Morrison said. I have legal authority here. Helen looked at the twins, seeing their terror and desperation. In 6 weeks, they'd become like her own daughters. The thought of losing them made her feel sick. What if I applied? To become their foster parent? Helen asked quickly. Or their guardian? Would that make a difference? Miss Morrison softened slightly. That's a process that takes months, Miss Thompson. Background checks, home studies, court hearings. In the meantime, these girls need to be in an approved placement. With people who treat them like servants, Helen said. With people who are licensed and monitored by the state, Miss Morrison corrected. Helen realized she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. Not today, anyway, but maybe she could buy some time. Give me 24 hours, she said. Let me call a lawyer, file the proper paperwork. Then we can discuss this like civilized people. Miss Morrison checked her watch. I really should take them now, please, Helen said. One day, what difference will one day make? Behind her, both girls held their breath, waiting for the answer that would determine their fate. Miss Morrison looked at her watch again, then at the 2 girls who stood frozen behind the counter. Their faces showed pure terror, the kind that comes from knowing you're about to lose everything good in your life. One day, she said finally. But I'm required to notify the Miller family that the girls have been located, and I'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. The moment the social worker left, Lucy and Lily bolted for the stairs. Helen found them 15 minutes later, frantically stuffing their few belongings into their backpacks. We have to go, Lucy said without looking up. Tonight, before she comes back. Where will you go? Helen asked, though she already knew the answer. Anywhere, nowhere. It didn't matter as long as they stayed together and stayed free. We'll figure it out, Lily said, rolling up the extra clothes Helen had bought them. We always do. Helen sat down heavily on one of the twin beds. Running isn't the answer. You'll spend your whole lives looking over your shoulders. Better than spending them scrubbing floors for people who don't care if we live or die, Lucy shot back. But what about school? What about having a real future? Both girls stopped packing and looked at her. This was our real future, Lily said. Quietly, these 6 weeks with you. They were the best we've ever had. Helen felt tears starting, but she blinked them back. Crying wouldn't help anyone right now. What if we fight this? What if we get a lawyer and make them listen? You heard what she said. It takes months. They'll drag us back to the Millers tonight, and by the time any lawyer does anything, we'll have disappeared again anyway. Helen knew they were right. She'd spent the afternoon making desperate phone calls. 2 lawyers had finally called her back, but both said the same thing. Emergency custody hearings took weeks to arrange, and the girls would have to stay in state custody until then. There has to be another way, Helen said. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Helen? Girls? It's Mrs. Foster from next door. Helen opened the door to find not just Mrs. Foster, but also Mr. Chun, Mrs. Rodriguez, and 3 other neighbors crowded in the narrow hallway. We heard what happened, Mrs. Foster said. Carol Brennan's been bragging all over town about how she got those government people involved. That woman needs to mind her own business, Mrs. Rodriguez added angrily. These girls haven't hurt anyone, Mr. Chun nodded. My wife sent soup. She says stress makes people forget to eat. Helen was touched by their concern, but also confused. I appreciate you all coming, but I'm not sure there's anything anyone can do. Maybe there is, said a voice from the back of the group. Helen was surprised to see Tom Bradley, the town's police chief, pushing through the crowd. Can I come in? We need to talk. Helen's heart sank. If the police were involved now, the girls' chances of staying had dropped to 0. Chief Bradley was a big man with kind eyes who'd known Helen since she was a teenager. He'd been David's fishing buddy and had stopped by the bakery regularly since the funeral, checking on her welfare. I got a call from social services, he said, settling his bulk into the small kitchen chair. They wanted me to make sure the girls don't run before tomorrow morning. Lucy and Lily exchanged terrified looks. Now, I told Ms. Morrison that I'd keep an eye on things, Chief Bradley continued. But I didn't promise anything specific about what I might or might not see, Helen frowned. What do you mean? I mean, if 2 girls were to disappear tonight, it might take me a while to notice. Maybe until tomorrow afternoon. Maybe longer? I get distracted by other police business. You do that? Lily whispered. Honey, I've lived in this town for 40 years. I know good people when I see them. I also know bureaucrats who care more about paperwork than kids. Mrs. Foster leaned forward. Tom's not the only one willing to help. My sister lives 3 counties over. She's got a big farm and doesn't ask many questions about visitors. My nephew drives long-haul trucks, Mr. Chun added. He could give someone a ride pretty far from here if needed. Helen looked around at the group of neighbors who'd come to help. You're all willing to risk trouble with the authorities? What authorities? Mrs. Rodriguez said with a shrug. We're just neighbors visiting neighbors. If some kids happened to wander off while we were having coffee, well, kids do that sometimes. Chief Bradley stood up. I need to get back to the station. Write up my report about checking on things here. Might take me a couple hours to finish all that paperwork. After he left, the other neighbors began making plans with the efficiency of people who'd organized church suppers and community fundraisers for decades. Betty's farm is about 6 hours' drive, Mrs. Foster said. Long enough to give you time to think, but close enough that Tom could bring you back if you change your minds. What about Helen? Lucy asked. Won't they arrest her for helping us? Helen hadn't thought about that possibility, but it didn't matter. Let me worry about that. No, Lily said firmly. We won't let you get in trouble because of us. You're not getting me in trouble, Helen said. I'm choosing to help because it's the right thing to do. Mrs. Rodriguez handed Helen a piece of paper. My cousin works for a lawyer in the state capitol. Immigration cases mostly, but she knows about emergency hearings. This is her number. And I called my daughter-in-law school, Mrs. Foster added. She's researching guardian rights. Says there might be ways to challenge the system. For the next hour, the neighbors created a network of support that amazed Helen. Phone numbers, safe houses, legal contacts, even someone who could provide fake IDs if necessary. These were law-abiding citizens talking about breaking rules to protect 2 children they barely knew. Why are you all doing this? Helen asked as the group prepared to leave. Mr. Chun answered for everyone. Because these girls belong here now, they're part of us, and we protect our own. After the neighbors left, Helen sat with Lucy and Lily in the small living room. Outside, Main Street was quiet except for the occasional car passing by. We should go, Lucy said. Tonight, like Chief Bradley suggested. Before that woman comes back. Is that what you really want? Helen asked. Both. Girls were quiet for a long moment. Finally, Lily spoke. We want to stay with you. But we won't let you get arrested trying to protect us. And we won't go back to the Millers, Lucy added. So running is the only choice left. Helen looked at these two brave girls who'd already survived more than most adults ever would. They deserved better than a life spent hiding and running. They deserved the chance to be normal teenagers with normal problems. What if we don't run? She said slowly. What if we stand and fight instead? How? Lucy asked. I don't know yet. But we've got a whole town willing to help us figure it out. Maybe that counts for something. Outside, a car drove slowly past the bakery. All three of them tensed, but it kept going. One more night, Helen said. Let's see what tomorrow brings. If things go badly, we'll have other options. But maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to make this work legally. The girls looked at each other, having one of their silent conversations. Finally, they nodded. Double quotes, one more night, Lily agreed. But if that social worker tries to drag us away tomorrow, we're gone. Helen understood. She'd make the same choice in their position, but tonight they were still together. Tonight they were still a family. And sometimes one more night was enough to change everything. Helen barely slept that night. Every sound outside made her heart race. Was it Miss Morrison coming early? The Millers arriving to reclaim their unpaid workers? Police cars to arrest her for harboring runaways? She checked on the girls 3 times, finding them curled together in one twin bed, holding hands even in sleep. At 5 in the morning, she gave up on rest and headed downstairs to start the ovens. Baking had always been her therapy, the rhythmic kneading and measuring helping to calm her nerves. Today she needed all the calm she could get. The girls appeared at 6. Dressed and ready for what might be their last day at Sweet Dreams Bakery. They worked silently, each lost in their own thoughts. The normal chatter and laughter were replaced by the heaviness of impending separation. Whatever happens today, Helen said as they arranged fresh pastries in the display case, I want you to know that these weeks have been the best I've had since David died. You two brought this place back to life. You saved us, Lily said quietly. Nobody's ever cared about us the way you do. Even if we have to leave, we'll never forget this, Lucy added. Or you. At 8:30, customers began arriving earlier than usual. Word had spread through town about the morning showdown, and people wanted to show their support. The bakery filled with familiar faces, farmers grabbing coffee before heading to their fields, shop owners opening early, retirees who usually came later in the day. Whatever you need, Helen, old Mr. Patterson said, pressing an extra 20 into her hand. These girls belong here. We're all behind you, added Mrs. Chun, squeezing Lily's shoulder. Don't let them take our girls away, our girls. The phrase made Helen's heart ache with both joy and fear. At exactly 9 o'clock, Miss Morrison's government sedan pulled up outside, but she wasn't alone. A police car followed, and behind that, a rusty pickup truck that made the girls gasp. The Millers, Lucy whispered, her face going white through the window. Helen watched a middle-aged couple climb out of the truck. Mrs. Miller was a thin woman with sharp features and calculating eyes. Mr. Miller looked tired and annoyed. This whole trip was an inconvenience he couldn't afford. The bakery fell silent as the official party entered. Miss Morrison came first, looking professional but slightly uncomfortable with the crowd. Behind her came the Millers and finally Officer Jenkins, Chief Bradley's youngest deputy. Miss Thompson, Miss Morrison said formally, I'm here to collect Lucy and Lily Chun and return them to their authorized placement. Actually, said a new voice from the doorway, you might want to hold off on that. Everyone turned to see a woman in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. She was young, maybe 30, with the confident bearing of someone used to courtrooms. And you are? Miss Morrison asked. Patricia Walsh, attorney for Miss Thompson and the Chun twins. She handed Miss Morrison a thick folder. That's an emergency petition for guardianship filed this morning in county court. Until the hearing, my clients are to remain in their current placement. Helen's mouth fell open. She hadn't hired a lawyer. She couldn't afford one. Miss Walsh caught her confused look and smiled slightly. Pro bono case. Referred by the state. Bar Association's Children's Advocacy Program. Miss Morrison flipped through the papers, frowning. This is highly irregular. The girls belong with their assigned foster family. Actually, Ms. Walsh said, opening her briefcase, I've been investigating the Miller placement quite thoroughly. She pulled out another folder, much thicker than the first. Would you like to see the statements from former foster children who lived there? Or the financial records showing how the Millers spend their state assistance money? Mrs. Miller spoke for the first time, her voice sharp and defensive. Those children are liars, ungrateful, every one of them. Ungrateful for being worked like servants? Ms. Walsh asked mildly. For being denied food as punishment? For sleeping 3 to a room while the Millers renovated their master suite with state funding? You can't prove any of that, Mr. Miller said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. Miss Walsh spread photographs across the bakery counter. These were taken by a former foster child who was smart enough to document the living conditions. Notice the mattresses on the floor, the empty refrigerator, the chore charts that would make Victorian workhouses seem humane. Miss Morrison studied the photos, her professional mask slipping slightly. Why wasn't this reported before? It was, Ms. Walsh said simply, multiple times. But the reports were dismissed as normal adolescent complaints. Amazing how children's voices get ignored when there's paperwork to process and budgets to balance. The crowd in the bakery had been silent during this exchange, but now Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward. Those girls have been nothing but polite and hardworking since they got here. Look at them. Everyone turned to look at Lucy and Lily, who stood behind the counter holding hands. In 6 weeks, they'd gained weight, lost the hollow look around their eyes, and carried themselves with confidence instead of fear. They're healthy, said Dr. Williams, who'd been quietly eating a muffin in the corner. I've been observing them informally, of course, but they show no signs of stress, malnutrition, or abuse. Quite the opposite. Chief Bradley chose that moment to speak up. From a law enforcement perspective, these girls have caused 0 problems in our community. They attend school regularly, work honestly, and contribute positively to local business. Can't say that about every teenager. Miss Morrison looked around the crowded bakery, clearly overwhelmed by the unified front. This is all very touching, but the law is the law. These children are wards of the state, and the state has assigned them to the Miller family. The state assigned them to people who abused them, Ms. Walsh said firmly, which makes the state culpable for any further harm. Are you prepared to take personal responsibility for sending these children back to documented abuse? The question hung in the air like smoke. Miss Morrison's face showed the internal struggle of a bureaucrat caught between rules and reality. Mrs. Miller made the mistake of speaking again. This is ridiculous. Those girls belong to us. We've invested time and money in their care. Invested? Lucy finally found her voice. You mean the money you got from the state for keeping us? The money you spent on your vacation while we ate? Peanut butter sandwiches for 3 days straight? And the time you invested making us clean your house for 12 hours a day? Lily added, even when we were sick? The room erupted in angry murmurs. Several customers stepped closer to the girls as if physically shielding them from the Millers. Ms. Walsh seized the moment. Miss Morrison, I'm formally requesting an immediate investigation into the Miller placement. Until that investigation is complete, my clients should remain in their current, stable environment. Miss Morrison looked at the hostile crowd, the damning evidence, and the 2 girls who were clearly thriving in their current situation. Helen could see her weighing career safety against doing what was right. I'll need to make some phone calls, she said finally. Consult with my supervisor. Of course, Miss Walsh said smoothly. The hearing is scheduled for next week. That should give everyone time to review the evidence thoroughly. The Millers started to protest, but Ms. Morrison cut them off. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I suggest you contact your own attorney. This situation has become more complicated than a simple pickup. As the official party filed out, the bakery burst into cheers. Customers hugged the girls, shook Helen's hand, and congratulated Ms. Walsh like she'd just won the lottery, but Helen noticed that Lucy and Lily remained cautious. They'd learned not to celebrate too early. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over yet. The week between the confrontation and the court hearing passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Miss Walsh became a regular fixture at the bakery, interviewing the girls, gathering statements from community members, and building what she called an airtight case for permanency. "The judge assigned to your hearing is Margaret Foster," she told Helen over coffee on Tuesday morning. "She's been on the family court bench for 15 years and has a reputation for putting children's welfare above bureaucratic convenience." "Is that good or bad for us?" Helen asked. "Very good. Judge Foster doesn't tolerate child abuse, and she's not impressed by agencies that enable it." But despite Ms. Walsh's confidence, Helen could see the stress wearing on Lucy and Lily. They threw themselves into work with desperate energy, as if perfect behavior might somehow guarantee they could stay. They studied harder, worked longer hours, and were unfailingly polite to every customer, no matter how demanding. "You don't have to be perfect," Helen told them one evening as they cleaned the kitchen for the third time. "The judge will see who you really are, not just how hard you work." "But what if working hard isn't enough?" Lily asked. "What if she decides we belong with the Millers because that's what the paperwork says?" "Then we'll appeal," Helen said firmly. "We'll fight this all the way to the state Supreme Court if we have to." Lucy looked up from scrubbing the counter. "You'd really do that? Even if it costs a lot of money and takes years?" "You're my daughters now," Helen said simply. "Parents don't give up on their children." The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time any of them had used the word daughters out loud, though they'd all been thinking it for weeks. "Daughters," Lily repeated softly, testing how it sounded. "I like it," Lucy said, smiling for the first time in days. Word of the upcoming hearing spread through Millbrook like news of an impending storm. People Helen barely knew stopped by the bakery to offer support. The high school principal called to say both girls were welcome to continue their education regardless of the outcome. Even the mayor promised to write a letter to the judge describing their positive impact on the community. "It's like the whole town adopted them," Mrs. Foster observed while picking up her daily bread order. "I've never seen anything like it." But not everyone was supportive. Carol Brennan made pointed comments about bleeding hearts and people who don't understand the system. She suggested that Helen was too emotionally involved to make rational decisions about the girls' welfare. "Those children need structure and supervision," Carol told anyone who'd listen. "Not some widow playing house with strays." Her words stung, partly because Helen sometimes wondered if they contained a grain of truth. Was she being selfish by fighting for custody? Were her motives purely about helping the girls, or was she trying to fill the emptiness David's death had left behind? Ms. Walsh addressed these concerns directly during one of their preparation sessions. "The judge will ask about your motivations," she warned. "Be prepared to explain why you want to be their guardian. Because they need someone who cares about them as individuals, not just as cases to be processed," Helen said without hesitation. "Because they deserve to feel safe and valued. Because every child should have at least one adult who believes in their potential." "And what about your own needs? Are you seeking guardianship to ease your loneliness?" Helen considered the question carefully. "Will having them in my life help heal the grief I feel over losing David?" "Probably. But that doesn't make my love for them less real or my commitment less serious. Good relationships help everyone involved grow and heal." The night before the hearing, Helen found the girls packing their backpacks again. "Just in case," Lucy explained, when she saw Helen's expression. "If things go badly, we want to be ready." "Where would you go this time?" Helen asked. "Mrs. Foster's sister said we could stay on her farm until we figure something out," Lily said. "Or Chief Bradley knows people who help kids in situations like ours." Helen sat down on the bed between them. "What if I told you that no matter what happens tomorrow, you'll always have a home here? Even if the court says you have to live somewhere else officially, this will always be your real home?" "You mean that?" Lucy asked. "I mean it. You've changed my life as much as I've changed yours. We're family now, and family doesn't disappear because of paperwork." The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching everyone's nervous mood. "Helen," wore her best dress, and the girls had borrowed formal clothes from Mrs. Rodriguez's teenage nieces. They looked older and more serious than their 15 years, like children forced to grow up too fast by circumstances beyond their control. The courthouse was a grim brick building that smelled of floor wax and anxiety. Miss Walsh met them in the hallway, looking confident in her navy suit and carrying a briefcase that seemed to contain their entire future. "Remember," she told the girls as they waited outside the courtroom, "answer the judge's questions honestly and completely. Don't volunteer information unless asked, but don't hide anything either. Judge Foster will respect your honesty." When their case was called, they filed into a small courtroom with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting. Judge Foster was a stern-looking woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Ms. Morrison sat at one table with a state attorney, while the Millers huddled with their lawyer at another. "This is an unusual case," Judge Foster began after reviewing the files. "We have a non-relative seeking emergency guardianship of 2 minors, who were previously placed in licensed foster care. Miss Walsh, please present your argument." For the next hour, Ms. Walsh methodically presented evidence of the girls' transformation under Helen's care. School records showing improved grades and attendance. Medical records documenting weight gain and improved health. Testimony from community members about their positive behavior and contributions. Then came the photographs and statements about life with the Millers. Judge Foster's expression grew darker as she reviewed images of overcrowded bedrooms, empty refrigerators, and excessive chore charts. Former foster children had provided written statements describing their experiences, painting a picture of systematic exploitation disguised as childcare. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," the judge said finally, "how do you respond to these allegations?" Mrs. Miller's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, these are unsubstantiated claims from troubled children with histories of behavioral problems. My clients have provided homes for dozens of foster children over the years. And how many of those children remained in contact with your clients after aging out of the system?" Judge Foster asked pointedly. The lawyer shuffled through his papers. "I don't have that information readily available." "I do," Miss Walsh interjected. "The answer is 0. None of the 43 children placed with the Millers over the past decade have maintained any relationship with them after leaving care. Most described their time there as the worst period of their lives." Judge Foster turned her attention to Lucy and Lily, who sat straight and still in their chairs. "Girls, I'd like to hear from you directly. Do you understand what's happening here today?" "Yes, ma'am," Lucy said clearly. "You're deciding whether we can stay with Helen or have to go back to the Millers. And what would you like to see happen?" Lily spoke up. "We want to stay with Helen. She's the first person who's ever treated us like we matter. She doesn't just see us as work or money, she sees us as people." "What about your concerns regarding Miss Thompson's ability to care for you long-term?" Lucy and Lily exchanged one of their silent looks before Lucy answered. "Helen lost her husband 6 months ago. She was sad and lonely when we met her. But taking care of us didn't just help us, it helped her too. We heal each other. Isn't that what families do?" Judge Foster made notes on her legal pad, her expression unreadable. The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of her pen and the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Finally, she looked up. "I'm ready to make my ruling." Judge Foster set down her pen and looked directly at Lucy and Lily. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Helen's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "In my 15 years on this bench," Judge Foster began, "I've seen thousands of cases involving children in crisis. I've learned that the letter of the law and the spirit of the law don't always align. Today is one of those days." She picked up the thick file of evidence Ms. Walsh had presented. "The documentation regarding the Miller placement is deeply troubling. What I see here isn't foster care, it's exploitation disguised as childcare. No child should be treated as unpaid labor, regardless of their circumstances." Mrs. Miller started to speak, but her lawyer quickly pulled her back down into her seat. "However," the judge continued, and Helen's stomach dropped at that word, The question before me isn't simply whether the Miller placement was inappropriate. It's whether Miss Thompson represents the best possible outcome for these children. Helen felt tears starting behind her eyes. After everything they'd been through, was the judge going to send the girls somewhere else entirely? Miss Thompson, Judge Foster said, looking directly at Helen, you've had no formal training in caring for traumatized children. You have no experience with the foster care system. Your own recent loss suggests you may be emotionally vulnerable. Why should I trust you with the welfare of these two girls? Helen stood up, her legs shaky but her voice steady. Your Honor, you're right that I don't have formal training, but I have something that training can't teach. I love these girls like they're my own. Not because I need them, but because they deserve to be loved. Love isn't always enough, the judge observed. No, but it's the foundation everything else builds on. Lucy and Lily have thrived in my care because they finally found someone who sees their potential instead of their problems. They're not just surviving anymore, they're growing into the amazing young women they were meant to be. Judge Foster made another note. And what about your financial situation? The bakery is struggling. Can you provide for their needs long term? Mrs. Walsh started to stand, but Helen gestured for her to wait. The bakery was struggling when the girls arrived. Since then, our sales have increased 30%. Not because I'm working harder, but because Lucy and Lily brought energy and hope back into the business. They didn't just save themselves by coming to me, they saved me too. The judge turned her attention back to the girls. Lucy, Lily, I need you to understand something. If I grant this guardianship, it means Helen becomes legally responsible for you until you turn 18. You can't change your minds if you get upset with her rules or decisions. This isn't a trial period, this is permanent. Do you understand that? Yes, ma'am, both girls said simultaneously. And Helen, if I grant this petition, these girls become your legal daughters in every way that matters. Their education, their health care, their future, all of it becomes your responsibility. Are you prepared for that commitment? Helen looked at Lucy and Lily, seeing not the scared, hungry children who'd knocked on her door 2 months ago, but the confident, caring young women they'd become. I've been prepared since the day they asked if they could stay. Judge Foster was quiet for what felt like an eternity, reviewing papers and making notes. Finally, she looked up with an expression Helen couldn't read. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I'm recommending that the state conduct a full investigation into your foster care license. The evidence presented today suggests a pattern of abuse that cannot be ignored. The Miller's lawyer whispered urgently to his clients, but Mrs. Miller was already gathering her purse, her face red with anger and embarrassment. Miss Morrison, the judge continued, I'm ordering social services to implement new oversight procedures for foster placements. These children fell through the cracks of a system that's supposed to protect them. That's unacceptable. Miss Morrison nodded, though she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. And now, Judge Foster said, turning to Helen and the girls, regarding the petition for guardianship. Helen reached over and took each girl's hand, squeezing gently. The evidence shows that Lucy and Lily Chun have not only recovered from their traumatic experiences, but have flourished under Ms. Thompson's care. Their grades have improved, their health has stabilized, and they've become contributing members of their community. Most importantly, they've regained something every child deserves, hope for the future. Helen felt tears starting to flow, but she didn't let go of the girl's hands. Therefore, I'm granting full legal guardianship to Helen Thompson, effective immediately. Miss Thompson, congratulations. You're now the legal guardian of Lucy and Lily Chun. The courtroom erupted. Helen heard cheering from the gallery, where half of Millbrook seemed to have shown up for the hearing. Lucy and Lily threw their arms around her, crying and laughing. At the same time, we can stay? Lily whispered through her tears. Really stay? Forever, Helen whispered back. You're my daughters now. Nothing can change that. Miss Walsh was grinning as she packed up her briefcase. There are some papers to sign, but the hard part is over. You're officially a family. 2 years later. Helen stood behind the counter of Sweet Dreams Bakery watching Lucy decorate a wedding cake with delicate sugar flowers while Lily helped a customer choose pastries for a business meeting. The bakery had expanded into the empty shop next door, now featuring a small cafe where people could sit and enjoy fresh coffee with their treats. Thompson's Bakery and Cafe read the new sign out front, painted by a local artist who'd insisted on doing it for free. The girls had legally changed their last names 6 months after the adoption was finalized, wanting to make their chosen family official in every possible way. Both girls were seniors now, with college scholarships waiting for them in the fall. Lucy planned to study business and culinary arts, dreaming of opening her own restaurant someday. Lily had been accepted to study social work, determined to help other kids like they'd once been. "Mrs. Thompson?" A small voice interrupted Helen's thoughts. She turned to see a teenage boy standing hesitantly in the doorway. He was thin and worn-looking, carrying a backpack that had seen better days. "I heard you sometimes help kids who don't have anywhere else to go." Helen's heart clenched with recognition. She'd seen that same desperate hope in Lucy and Lily's eyes 2 years ago. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Danny, I aged out of foster care last month, but I can't find work and I'm sleeping in my car. Someone said you might need help here." Lucy looked up from her cake decorating, catching Helen's eye. Lily emerged from the back room, both girls reading the situation immediately. "Can you start tomorrow morning?" Helen asked. "The apartment upstairs needs some work, but it's livable. And we always need extra hands around here." Danny's face transformed with relief and hope. "Really? You'd give me a chance?" "Everyone deserves a chance," Helen said. "Sometimes it just takes the right people believing in you." As Danny headed upstairs to see the apartment, Lucy smiled at her mother. "Think he'll work out?" "I think we're about to find out," Helen replied. "After all, this family started with 2 scared kids who knocked on my door asking for help." "Look how that turned out," Lily grinned. "Pretty well, I'd say." Helen looked around at the bustling cafe, at her daughters who'd grown into confident young women, at the community that had rallied around them when they needed it most. The future was full of possibilities, and their family was just getting started. Outside, Main Street buzzed with afternoon activity. Millbrook had found new life, just like they all had. And somewhere in that busy, hopeful community, another family was being born, one choice, one chance, one act of love at a time.